In 1988, Ingvar Kamprad was worth approximately $6 billion. He was the founder of IKEA, one of the most recognized companies on the planet. He lived in Switzerland at the time, which is relevant because Switzerland is not a cheap country to live in. And when he needed to get around, he drove a 1993 Volvo 240. The same one for over a decade. He flew economy class. He took the bus when it made sense. He ate lunch at IKEA cafeterias alongside regular employees. He was once photographed haggling at a flea market in Sweden because he found a lamp he liked but thought the asking price was too high. The instinct most people have when hearing that is to call it eccentricity, a quirk, a rich person playing at being ordinary for the story it tells. But that reading misses something. Kamprad wasn't performing humility. He was expressing a deeply ingrained cultural reflex, so automatic he probably couldn't have explained it if you'd asked him directly. A reflex that runs through Swedish culture specifically in a way that's distinct enough, legible enough, and structurally specific enough that it has a name and a history and a psychological mechanism worth understanding properly. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far this story travels. And if you're loving it so far, join the family by hitting subscribe, because tomorrow we've got something special lined up just for you. So today, why Swedes specifically handle success, achievement, and visible status the way they do, what the mechanism underneath it actually is, and why a culture that quietly suppresses bragging has somehow produced a disproportionate number of globally recognized companies and brands, while apparently finding the whole thing slightly embarrassing. Let's start with a specific word before anything else. Not Janteloven, which we'll get to, but a Swedish word you've probably heard before without necessarily knowing what it actually means. Lagom. Pronounced something like Lagom. It translates roughly to just the right amount, not too much, not too little. Exactly enough. The legend behind it, which may or may not be historically accurate, is that it comes from a phrase meaning around the team, referring to how a shared drinking horn would be passed in a group, with the expectation that each person would take exactly their fair share, neither hoarding nor going without. Whether or not the etymology holds up, the concept does. Lagom in modern Swedish doesn't just describe food portions or furniture arrangements. It describes the ideal relationship between an individual and the group they exist within, not standing too far back and not standing too far forward. The right amount of presence, the right amount of visibility, the right amount of credit taken in the room after something goes well. Now layer that on top of something older and more formally described. Janteloven, the Law of Jante. It comes from a 1933 satirical novel by a Danish-Norwegian author named Axel Sandemose, describing a fictional small town governed by 10 unwritten rules. You are not to think you are anything special. You are not to think you are smarter than we are. You are not to think you know more than we are. You are not to think you are more important than we are. Sandemose meant it as a critique, a dark observation about small community conformity. What happened instead was that people across the region read it and thought, yes, that is actually how this works here. And instead of being horrified, they mostly just nodded. Because Janteloven wasn't a new idea Sandemose invented. It was a name finally given to a survival instinct that had been operating for centuries before anyone wrote it down. Small farming and fishing communities in Scandinavia, where survival genuinely depended on collective cooperation, and where one household accumulating visible advantage could threaten the group's cohesion, developed an almost automatic social immune response to displays of individual superiority. Not because equality was a political philosophy anyone had formally adopted. Because a fishing village where one person started bragging about their better nets was a fishing village running slightly higher odds of falling apart when the winter got bad enough to require everyone pulling in the same direction. Sweden specifically added Lagom on top of this as a kind of social operating instruction. Where Janteloven says don't claim to be better, Lagom says take only your share and make sure what you take looks like exactly that. Not less, which is martyrdom, not more, which is arrogance. Exactly enough. The precision of it is actually what makes it culturally powerful. It doesn't demand self-erasure. It demands calibration. Here's what this looks like in practice. because abstract cultural values only mean something once you can see them operating in specific situations. Sweden has among the highest rates of salary transparency in the developed world, either through formal policy, collective bargaining agreements, or simply cultural openness about income that would feel intrusive almost anywhere else. But unlike the Norwegian public tax database, where openness is formally enforced by law, Swedish salary transparency often operates more informally. The conversation about what people earn simply happens in Sweden, in contexts where it wouldn't in most of the world. Not boastfully, matter-of-factly. The information circulates not as status signaling, but as collective calibration. Everyone roughly knowing what everyone else makes removes income as a private weapon. You can't brag about something everyone already knows. Watch how Swedish colleagues handle professional recognition, and the pattern becomes visible immediately. An award, a promotion, a major project completed. The typical response isn't a LinkedIn announcement about personal journeys and gratitude for the opportunity to grow. It's a quiet acknowledgement, credit distributed outward to everyone involved. A deflection so natural, it looks almost automatic. Because it is almost automatic. The cultural muscle memory for this gets built so early in Swedish social development that by adulthood it operates without conscious effort, accepting praise fully, sitting in it, taking up the full visible space of a genuine personal achievement, feels slightly wrong, in the same way using the wrong fork feels wrong at a formal dinner. Not immoral, just off. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because Sweden faces a specific tension that Denmark or Norway don't face in quite the same form. Sweden is home to IKEA, Spotify, H&M, Volvo, Ericsson, ABBA, Minecraft. A country of 10 million people has produced a list of globally recognized brands that would be impressive for a country 5 times its size. Swedish founders and innovators built empires, and they did it while apparently finding the whole process slightly culturally uncomfortable. Kamprad didn't just drive the same old Volvo because he was forgetful. He kept doing it after the story became famous, after journalists wrote about it, after it became part of the IKEA mythology. He kept doing it because the alternative, the motorcade version of a billionaire's life, would have felt genuinely wrong to him in a way that isn't fully explainable through logic. It would have been too much. It would have been more than his share. It would have been un-Lagom in a way his entire upbringing had made viscerally uncomfortable. Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify, has given interviews in which he describes real discomfort with the celebrity founder culture that surrounds tech companies internationally. The pressure to become the face, the brand, the performing visionary. Swedish culture specifically doesn't produce a lot of that archetype naturally. When it does appear, it tends to get exported, built once the founder has spent enough time in Silicon Valley to download a different operating system over the original one. What's psychologically interesting here is what the Swedish model actually protects against versus what it costs. The protection is real and measurable. Cultures with lower tolerance for visible status competition consistently show lower rates of what researchers call relative deprivation, the specific form of dissatisfaction that comes not from your life being bad in absolute terms, but from your life appearing worse than someone else's life appears to be. If no one around you is performing wealth or achievement at high volume, your own baseline satisfaction doesn't constantly get recalibrated downward by comparison. The Lagom principle applied socially keeps the reference point from drifting. The game doesn't escalate because the culture declines to play escalation in the first place. The cost is also real and worth naming honestly. Sweden's most successful global exports were almost universally built by people who had to develop, consciously or not, a tolerance for exactly the self-promotion their home culture had trained them to suppress. Spotify required Ek to be a public face whether he wanted one or not. IKEA's global expansion required Kamprad to become a recognizable story, a brand personality, something larger than one man with a sensible Volvo. Swedish founders operating in international competitive markets have described genuine friction between what their culture trained them to be and what those environments reward. Janteloven and Lagom don't distinguish between arrogance and justified confidence. They apply the same quiet but persistent pressure to both, which is precisely why Sweden hasn't fully resolved this tension and probably won't. The cultural immune response to visible superiority that protected fishing communities in the 1400s runs into predictable friction when that same community scales to a 10 million-person modern economy, competing in a global market where confident self-promotion is often simply how opportunities get created. The most honest way to hold all of this at once is this: Sweden didn't produce a culture of quiet success by accident, and the quiet isn't a performance of modesty, any more than Comprad's Volvo was a performance. It's a genuine orientation toward where value is allowed to come from, not from being seen to have more, earn more, or achieve more than the people around you. From the work itself, from being exactly what the situation requires, not less, not more. Lagom. Whether that's a limitation or a superpower depends almost entirely on which game you're playing. In a fishing village in the 1400s, it kept the village alive through winter. In a modern global market, it creates some friction and some unusual outcomes. In your own daily life, the question worth borrowing from it isn't whether you should start flying economy and haggling at flea markets. It's whether the version of success you're currently performing is something you're doing because it's genuinely satisfying, or because the performance itself became the point somewhere along the way without you quite noticing when that happened. That's our story. If you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. And tomorrow, more stories are waiting for you. Thanks for watching.